Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar regarding Powerproject BIM. My name is Ben Taunt, and I'll be spending the next 30 minutes outlining the core concepts of the Powerproject BIM solution. So once we've got these gentle introductions out of the way, I'm actually going to spend a few minutes talking about the concept of 4D and the concept of BIM in the first place, just so we can get our heads around what it is the topic we're talking about and why perhaps we should even care about it. What are going to be the benefits to me as a user in embracing the solutions we're talking about? That will naturally lead us into looking at an initial example of one of those solutions in terms of Powerproject BIM. And today we're really just going to get our feet wet with it, looking at the core basics in how we can utilize it on some simple projects before finishing up with some points about the next steps and an opportunity for any questions. This is part one of a two-part webinar series. So tomorrow afternoon at the same time, we'll reconvene online to go into more depth. So whereas today we are just going to dip our toe into it and look at the concepts of it, tomorrow is when we're actually going to explore some of the core functionality. So that might mean that some of the topics today seem a little bit more basic, and that would mean that I would encourage you to rejoin us tomorrow when we scratch the surface a little bit deeper and look at some of the more complex functionality that sits within the solution. But really, it's quite important to get our head around it in the first place before we start delving into the detail. I mentioned questions, and everyone's microphone is muted, so I can't hear any background noise. Please do therefore type into the question panel any questions you have for me, and they'll pop up on my screen. I'll try my best to read those and answer them as we go along. Chances are I'll get to them at the end of the session, or if need be, in subsequent emails. You can move that panel off to the side if it's in your way by using the orange arrow. And one final point, this whole session today is being recorded. And in about an hour's time, you'll get an email from GoToWebinar with a link to allow you to watch the webinar another time. And you can share that link with colleagues as well. So please do pass that around anybody who may be interested in hearing what we said today. But I'm going to roll back right to the very beginning in terms of what is 4D BIM. And there's even an argument about what the three-letter acronym BIM stands for. Convention says it is Building Information Model. But you may have more than one model. So does that make it building information models? It may be the process around those models. So it might be building information modeling, but the one I prefer is building information management, and almost ignoring the model entirely, really. And thinking of BIM purely as a process of how we are going to manage the data around some sort of fixed asset. Even the word building is arguably incorrect when we think about how this can apply to bridges or even to shipbuilding or something that doesn't even require a building to be present. So what we're really talking about here is information management. However, in the context of this scenario, we are going to manage this information using some sort of 3D representation of what it is we're doing. And I will now conventionally refer back to it as a building. So here we have some 3D models of some sort of building, a little college that's knocked up in Autodesk, in Revit, to allow us to have a three-dimensional representation of a building. Now, because BIM is about data sharing, the best way of sharing data is by using formats that everyone can understand rather than complying with only one vendor's format. And there's a solution out there called IFC, which is an open industry standard. It's actually an ISO standard, which means that all sorts of different software products can read an IFC file. So in order to embrace BIM, we're going to share a 3D model in IFC, either as one complete model, what they call a federated model, or as a number of separate files. And actually, maybe we're chucking extra models on top as well to show the surrounding site, existing buildings, temporary items for visualization purposes, so other items like tower cranes that might impact on our build sequence. So BIM is around that model itself. So it starts off as a 3D model. If you add time to that 3D model, when are we going to do things? You add time data, it's called the fourth dimension. So by adding time to a 3D model, that's the fourth dimension, hence 4D. So what we've got on screen is a video showing a building up out the ground over time, and that is a 4D representation of what it is we're up to. Quick comment about the system we're using today, GoToWebinar. It only sends you at your end a screenshot of my screen about twice a second. So you'll, I'm afraid, only see a jagged version of any videos that I display. My end, that's playing nice and smoothly, but I do understand it looks jagged at your end. But anyway, that is conventionally what you would refer to as a 4D representation. Now, what's the benefit of going through and creating that 4D view? And the answer is we can produce a more rigorous schedule. So whereas at the top there, I've got a traditional Gantt chart driven schedule, if by visualizing that in 4D, I might be able to spot problems that weren't easily identifiable by looking at the Gantt chart. I may be able to check whether that schedule is robust, whether it's feasible. The noddy example is that I've built the roof according to my plan, but I haven't actually put the supporting structures underneath in place. That might not necessarily be visually visible on my Gantt chart, but in a 4D animation, that'll be clear because you'll have a roof suspended in midair by magic. So we've got a way of checking our schedule, making us more robust in terms of what we're designing, but perhaps we can also start to automate some of this planning. We might be able to use templates and historic information to help us produce our schedules very quickly and easily. Perhaps we can do things like look at the quantity information from a 3D model. How big was that roof? The model will tell me how big the roof is, therefore it can inform the duration of the schedule. And it may be also that we can help with managing our resources. We may utilize the site better by helping us understand where on the site the different tasks are taking place. So if we can show that in a given week, we've got all our resources concentrated in only one corner of the site, that may mean there's whole areas of the site which have been neglected. And if we put our resources into those areas, we could perhaps accelerate our schedule. Then there's the whole communication piece, and again, I'll run a little video there for you. It's a better way of explaining what those Gantt chart bars and lines mean by having this animation that's running. We can better show people what's happening. We can pause that. We can display versions of that purely for resource. We might be able to show a local community what the site is going to look like at a given date and time from a particular position on the fencing and the hoarding. So we can communicate what we're up to a lot better. We can have progress review meetings with our subcontractors sat around a screen, looking at 3D models of stuff rather than getting our China graph pencil out and drawing lines on a Gantt chart. So there's all sorts of reasons why we should embrace 4D. But there are some steps we've got to take to get there. We've got to produce this information somehow. It doesn't just come by magic. So that's why we need a software solution to help us to combine that scheduling information with the 3D model. And funnily enough, Powerproject BIM is one of those software solutions that we're going to talk about today. So by using a 4D solution, you can take an existing schedule, add in a 3D model, and produce a 4D environment. Now, if anybody here is not familiar with Powerproject, just a quick recap. At the heart, it has a very comprehensive and feature-rich scheduling tool, which is easy to use. We've got a number of supporting products around the outside, of which Powerproject the Site Progress mobile solution is an example. The add-ons for doing things like risk analysis, the free viewer, the subject I'll return to later, BI reports, business intelligence data, dashboards, basically on how your project is going. And Powerproject BIM is one of these other components that is a supporting solution within the Powerproject toolset. What does it actually do? Well, our strapline here is to bring 4D planning within affordable reach. That means that we can spin out this solution to our customers without having to charge a fortune for it. Our philosophy is that we should be able to get BIM products into every planner's hands without having it to be cost prohibitive. And by doing that, we're giving you a solution that adds into an existing product you already know and understand. So if you've already got Powerproject, you know how it works. Adding in the BIM solution on top of your existing Powerproject is a quick win, really. It's software you already understand, it's software you already have. Add that extra module to it, and you get a lot of additional benefit very quickly. So we're going to stick that model alongside the Gantt chart. We're going to go through a process of linking the model to the Gantt chart, and I'm going to show you today 3 key ways of linking the model up. One's going to be simply by dragging and dropping between the windows, using that normal intuitive Powerproject style of using the mouse, clicking on stuff, dragging stuff around, the way that we're used to interacting with the software, but also by doing sort of powerful searches, we call them, Find me within the model every piece of balustrade. There may be thousands of pieces of balustrade. The software will find them all for you automatically by using algorithms. So we can use these searches, link it up, and then simulate the model to produce those video type outputs we saw earlier. But because this is Powerproject and Powerproject holds various different versions of the schedule, we might want to analyze both the planned or indeed the actual dates that exist within the plan. And Powerproject allows you to use any number of different scenarios, really. So that's an extra solution benefit we've come across now. We're talking about scenario planning within Powerproject. And we do need to make sure we're sharing this data with other people. So it's not just sitting on the planner's desktop or some sort of BIM expert. The ones of Powerproject BIM, making sure we're sharing it with other people within the local stakeholder community. So without doing any more PowerPoint, I'm going to dive straight into a demonstration of how we achieve that. And as I mentioned today, the basics are going to be covered. How do we bring in a model? How do we link that model up to a Gantt chart? How do we solve some of the common problems around models? That's to do with splitting pieces up into smaller segments. We will touch on progress reporting. That's a big part of Powerproject, making sure the project is kept up to date. How do we display that? And then a little section on getting the data back out again, just so by the end of today, we've pulled in a model, we've linked it up, and we've done something with it. Then tomorrow we can move on to some of the more complex items. So to show this demo, I am going to start from the very beginning by using a template and creating a blank project that hasn't got any data in it at this point. If you don't already use a template in Powerproject, I strongly recommend you do use them, either the ones we ship for standard, but more powerful would be the ones you could develop yourself, and we can help you develop a template. But once you've got a project open, I can browse for the IFC model of the building I'm working on, or the asset, the bridge, the ship, whatever it is you're planning. I'm just going to use a simple house because it's a nice quick one to open up, and that's always useful for demos. Not too complicated. We're going to open a little house, and we're going to create ourselves a schedule based on it. So at this point, Powerproject is rendering that 3D model, putting it in, creating quick reference data, so it always renders quicker the second time you open it. And there is my model in glorious 3D. I can zoom and pan it, do all the things you'd expect me to be able to do within a 3D visualization tool. But one of the things I can also do is start to click on the assets that exist within this model and look at the properties of those. And you'll see on the right-hand side, as I go and clip around them, different parts of this model, different parts of this different bits of data being pulled out from it. Now, Powerproject BIM will look at any data that's in the model and show it within this panel. So if there's any extra files, any extra fields you've put into your model, Powerproject will show those. But if I want to create a Gantt chart from this item, I can literally press the Control key, drag my mouse cursor over, and drop onto the Gantt chart section, and that creates me a new task that's going to be linked to that wall. Sorry, to that floor slab. So that floor slab, if I go and pick up something else, a bit of wall, drop that on the Gantt chart, pick up that chimney, drop that on the Gantt chart. If I go back and click on these activities, as I click into the Gantt chart, we're going to highlight in yellow what it is on the model that represents. Particularly once I turn the option on for that track selection. So let's try that again. If we click on these items, you'll see they're getting highlighted in yellow. Likewise, if I was to go back and click in the model, we highlight the task. So the two are now interlinked between the two of them. We used a default sort of duration for these tasks. So that's just a default duration, but the task name came from the item itself. So that's what it's called in the IFC. But within Powerproject, of course, we can overwrite these things. We can change them. We can change our durations. We can change our logic. We can do whatever we think is acceptable to produce a plan. But there we go. We've now created a project plan, but these tasks are linked up. So the model linking number one, pick up an item from the model, drop it on the Gantt chart. Option number two is if you've already got a sequence of tasks, so maybe you've done a pre-construction schedule and then you get your model. So these tasks may already exist, no problem at all. We can click on something in the Gantt chart, we can drag it over, and we can drop it on an existing task. No problem with that whatsoever. Now, if we're trying to link lots of stuff, we might start to get lost in terms of what has been linked and what has not been linked. So we've got an option here called unscheduled product mode. And when I'm in unscheduled product mode, anything that's already linked to my Gantt chart disappears from the view. Let me just increase the size of this window. You'll see that now different parts of this model have disappeared. That's because if I pick up this pink wall, I link it to the task, it is now on the schedule and it disappears from my visualization. Let me do that with the roof. If I link the roof up, it reveals lots of roof beams beneath it. So that's a good way of us knowing what hasn't yet been linked to the chart. And if I do have lots of roof beams, I've got different ways of handling that. I can actually hold down the control key and multi-select, so I can click on multiple ones at once. I can hold down the shift key and I can actually draw a green box, and Powerproject in this case is linking up any item that even touches that green box because it's gone from left to right, it's a thick outline, anything that touches that box gets linked up. If I then do the other direction, which is from the right hand side dragging over to the left, you'll see I've got a dotted line box, and only those items which are wholly within the visualization are now linking up. So if I wanted to grab only some of these window panes, I could use this dotted box as a way of linking up only those window panes I wanted to link up. And that's much, much easier than having to individually select each individual asset. That'll take me a very long time. So instead I can draw a box and get those to link themselves up. Now that in itself is quite clever, but if I go back to this example of these roof beams, I may have 1,000 roof beams that I can't even possibly see to link them up. And that's when I like to use a search to find all those. So I'm just going to turn everything back on again, go into my searches and look at my example of level 3 beams. If I look at the properties of this, this is a search that already exists within the template. So when I used Powerproject BIM template, all of these searches are already configured within it. Now, clearly, you'll need to develop your own for your own projects. But in here, we can have a sequence of searches that look for certain criteria. The search called level 3 beams is looking for any entity which is tagged as a beam. So that's one of the properties of these items here. And we can look at that and say, look, there's a beam. It's also looking for a location tag. In this case, it's looking for location not equal to level 2. If I look at the results page, it's found all of these different items which match our criteria. And I can highlight all of those on the screen with just one click of the button. So if I had 10,000 roof beams, rather than having to click 10,000 times, I could create a search that says, find me anything that is a roof beam, and Powerproject will find all of that in one go. And then to link all this up to the Gantt chart, what I'm simply going to do is choose all of my searches, right-click, create task, and Powerproject is going to go through and create one task for every single item in my search. And there's now nothing shown on screen in the 3D view because everything matches my search criteria. So let me turn that back on again so we still have our model. And you'll see that everything now links to a task. I've done a very quick start-finish linking and a very simple reschedule. Clearly, this isn't a realistic project, but within a matter of seconds, I've created a fully linked bar chart, where as I go through these tasks one by one, we have highlighted on the screen everything in our sequence. That means I can go up here, press play on my timeline viewer, and we'll slide through here one by one. If I turn on this red drop line, as it slides across the screen, the Gantt chart slides across as well. And as we get to the start date, we start to show on screen all of these items. I can obviously pause that at any point. I can pick up this slider and move it left to right, see the red line slide, and see my change in the 4D sequence. So in a matter of seconds, I created a 4D sequence because I used that template. So there's 3 methods of linking and creating a very first schedule. I do want to talk a little bit further about this roof, however, At the moment, it's set to be one task, and at the moment, that task simply appears on the back of a lorry one day. We have no roof. The next day, we've got a roof. And as we know, that doesn't really reflect what actually happens out there in the real world. So what I might instead want to do is represent this roof as a number of different pieces. And I've got three ways of what's called splitting that roof up. Simply by some percentage cuts. So I can go in here and say we're going to cut it into 2 axes. We're going to cut it a number of different times, and I can create a checkerboard pattern. So I now have a number of separate roof beams that represent my build. Now when I run that sequence, those roof beams will appear, roof panels will appear one after another. As we go through the build, you'll see they now don't just all appear at once, but instead they can appear separately. And I can split a split product even more times. I can split that down any further number of times. I can merge items, so I can choose a number of different items that I might want to merge together. So there we go. If I merge that, I've now created 2 little skylights and I'll frame around the outside. But all of that is rather arbitrary in how it's been cut up. It's literally only being cut up based on a percentage cut. But let's say I wanted to split this roof at the place it intersects down here with this roof beam. Well, instead I can choose that panel. I can split it at other products. And I can go into here, I can select that roof beam. And what I'm doing is splitting that roof panel where it interacts with that roof beam. Now if I hit OK, you'll see a perfectly well aligned cut aligning with the middle of that beam. So therefore, without having to do a manual split, without having to use a percentage split, I've split based on the interaction with other items. So if you think about a lift shaft, roof to ceiling lift shaft, we can actually get that to cut itself up every time it hits one of the roof slabs. Now you would have also seen a third option called to split manually. If I just choose this bit here, I can, there we go. I've just split that very quickly. Let me run that again. Pick a roof panel, split that manually. I can actually draw a black line across that. It could just be one single cut, so I can do a diagonal cut across like that, and that will then cut it into 2 diagonal pieces. Or instead I can use this, this drawing tool to create polygons. So I can create some sort of strange shape on this roof beam and create a cut based purely on my poor drawing skills. So we now have different panels based on the sections I've manually drawn. So there we've got 3 very distinctive ways of cutting things up based on how we go. Now when we do cuts, we assign an addition to its order in the Gantt chart. We assign this order you'll have seen over here on the side called a build order. So I can actually manually edit these. I can say my 2 little bits of roof panel in the middle are going to be the last things we build. So I can make those both number 18. So that then means that when I run my sequence, those bits around the outside are going to be the last, sorry, those bits in the middle are effectively the last parts of the roof that we render. And there we go. So I've gone through here, I've created a project plan, and I have magically linked everything up to my Gantt chart. That's a good example now where I can show you one where we've put a little bit more time and effort into it. And that's this college building here. Straight away, you'll see I've got 2 versions of this model shown on the screen, but that's because on my Gantt chart, I've got 2 versions of time. I've got my live dates, these are currently shown as sort of green bars. I've got my baseline dates, those are these yellow bars underneath. What I can do with my playback is state that the comparison window, which is this model viewed currently down at the bottom, uses the baseline, and I can specify which baseline. Whereas the top view, the live view, uses the live project dates. That then means that when I hit playback, and again we look at that red line sliding across the screen, we can start to play spot the difference. If I pause it there and I look at my Gantt chart, the red line tells me I should have finished all of the pile caps. However, by looking at where that line is cutting through the pile caps, the live task shows I've only done half of them. And well, guess what? underneath here, in the comparison view, all of the pile caps have been completed and the rebars going in. Up here, only half of my pile caps have been completed. So we get a visual way of saying what's behind schedule, what's ahead of schedule by looking at this comparison between updating. We may also be able to run different scenarios in a similar section, different types of method of working, different construction techniques. By comparing to baseline, we can have a visual check of what's in the two different scenarios we've got on screen. There's also some other filters. I can show all the items which are planned, all the items which are completed. I could run filters showing what's behind schedule. We can actually recolor based on some of these items. So timeline behavior, I can actually get the model itself to change its color based on whether it's a task which is early or late. But all of these items are starting to build up this picture that Powerproject BIM gives you a lot of functionality to analyze your project once you've created it in the first place. So whilst I don't want to give game away tomorrow, for tomorrow's session, that's where we're going to pick up on tomorrow. We're going to start to delve into some more detail about these outputs and indeed the visualizations themselves. But I don't want to leave you hanging. I want you to think there's some other things you can do in terms of sharing even what you've done today. And by that, I'm going to bring up the print dialog. And in my print dialog, if I flip this to a landscape view, straight away you'll see on the background that I've got my BIM model in my printout. So I can print my schedule and show the 4D model, and it's not completed. I've printed this out as of the end of the year, showing me that the model at a certain point in time still has some progress to be achieved on it. So with the border files that you create in PowerDraw, you can specify where your BIM model is going to be displayed on the screen. And it is what you see is what you get. So if I was to sort of run this sequence back to a certain place in time, perhaps I was going to close up a number of sections. When I hit my file print, I will only see what it is that I've got represented on the screen at any one time. You'll see we've now got that same sort of view on the printout that we had in the live version of Powerproject. And one final topic before we finish off, if I want to save all of this and share it with someone who doesn't have Powerproject, I can actually save it as a Powerproject Viewer, APV, as the Powerproject Viewer BIM file. And if I did save it into that format, what it's going to do is going to wrap up my live dates, it's going to wrap up my baseline dates, and it's going to wrap up the IFC all into one complete file format that I can then give to users of our project viewer and allow them to see everything that I've done in Powerproject BIM, but by using a tool which is at no cost to them. Clearly, they can't make any changes to the plan. It is a read-only viewer, but at least they get a chance to do the same thing we did today in terms of moving that slider left or right, zooming and panning their way around the model and analyzing the schedule, but without having to pay any money for any licenses. So worth pointing that out. If you don't know where the viewer is, you can download it from our website. And it's a really great way of sharing your 4D project plan with users at no additional cost. If that was enough to whet your appetite on Powerproject BIM, as I mentioned very early on, you can add this module to any existing license of Powerproject for the prices shown on the screen. Of course, I'm sat here in the UK. If you've joined us from outside the UK, good morning or good afternoon. If you contact your local reseller, the people who provide Powerproject within your region, they'll be able to quote you the license costs in your own local currency, provide you with demonstrations, trials, training courses, etc., etc. If you are listening in the UK, then give us a call at head office here in Haddenham. We'll be able to provide you with a free trial within your existing license and help you to understand the additional power that this can provide to your projects. I did touch on training. We do, of course, have a training course for the BIM module. We assume you already know how to use Powerproject, and we spend one day going over the additional functionality that relates to the BIM module that we saw today. We can do that here again, as I mentioned, in Haddenham at head office, or we'll come out to you and hold it at your location. I've had this home a couple of times. Tomorrow we are reconvening in the afternoon to look at some of the more complex features in Powerproject. We're going to analyze the IFC. We're going to get hold of quantities data from it. We're going to use that in formula. We're going to add in site objects like tower cranes and diggers and move those around. And And then we're going to do a lot of fun in terms of exporting that out to other formats, such as a video file, series of images, or indeed further compressed 3D model formats. So that's all happening tomorrow afternoon. Revisit our website if you're not yet signed up. But with my half-hour allotted time completed, I'm going to end this session shortly. So if you do have any questions for me, do type those into the GoToMeeting control panel and they'll pop up on my screen. But we do have a feedback form that will commence once you exit the webinar. That will allow you to answer a few quick questions about today's session and your understanding of the software. Just helps the team to understand what action may relate to your interest moving forwards. So there we go. I haven't had any questions, so hopefully that means either we've answered everything today or you're waiting with anticipation for tomorrow's session. So with that in mind, I'll let everybody carry on with their busy Wednesday afternoons. Wish you well and look forward to speaking to you tomorrow about the functionality that exists within Powerproject BIM.